So formative assessments, to start off with, has specific definitions that create this general features of it. The bottom of that pyramid that you see in front of you starts with the most important element or definition in the generic feature of formative assessment, which is that it informs about students' learning and informs about teachers' instruction. So through formative assessments, basically you learn about two important things. The first thing is that you learn about how much did this student learn. The average of amount of knowledge that the students gained after or throughout the learning process. Also, students learn about themselves and how much did they learn and how much do they know, and where are the areas that they are seeking more help at. So this kind of informs them about what they know so far in the content knowledge they're acquiring. It also informs teachers about their teaching. Teachers learn about how well their instruction is going. Are they achieving their objectives and goals after an instructional period? Do they need any kind of tweaking or modification or reinforcement in that process? So these two important things are the goal or main goals of a formative assessment, hence it shapes the definition of it. Another feature or definition of formative assessment is that it's a direct part that stems from instruction. In other words, formative assessment is not alienated from the instructional process. It is a continuum part of that process. You do not instruct in isolation from formative assessment. So to give an example, you can be instructing or teaching a lesson and you interrupt that lesson in order to check for understanding and then go back to teaching and then stop and then go back to teaching. So it is part of the instruction. Another example is that formative assessment can be a project-based assessment where it stems from a constructive, collaborative, or cooperative group of discussions, and from these discussions students start to work on a project or research where they start to find information and produce a final product at the end, which is the formative assessment. So again, formative assessment is an integrated part from the instructional process. The third thing, as I was just saying, that it is easy to do interruptions for your formative assessment, to teach a lesson or to reteach or remediate and then start again and go back to the formative assessment. Versus summative assessment, you cannot go anywhere and you cannot interrupt the test. You give the test to see the end result, but you cannot interrupt to reteach or remediate and then go back to the test. So the beauty of formative assessment is that it really is a special part of instruction. It's part of it, and its goal is to actually target instruction and students' understanding. The next level is that formative assessment is a clear tool for content modification. So you can utilize whatever feedback that you receive from that end product of that formative assessment to better modify your content, either for this lesson or for the next unit or even for the next group of students. This will enable you to make the changes that you thought next time I need to do this change, or next time I will be teaching it differently because students did not get this part, or students really loved when I did this activity. I'm going to include this as an integral part for this activity. So formative assessment helps you to do these kinds of modifications. The last and at the top of this pyramid is that integral part of differentiation and scaffolding, especially for ESOL students. You need to include differentiation and scaffolding within the design of formative assessment. And remember, we talked about differentiation as this tool that you have to use in differentiating in the content, your choices of the content, lesson, and activities. The process, how you're integrating your activities, how are you dividing your groups, how are you putting students' activities into either corners or different intelligences or different proficiency levels, and the product, which is your final assessment. How are you differentiating your products? Some students need to do that, but some students can't do this, so I'm going to differentiate here by giving them what they can do rather than what they can't. So for example, if you have ESOL students, you can ask them, instead of writing their feedback on a specific research like all of the other general ed students, you can actually ask them to maybe draw a picture, or you're giving them resource sentences where they can pick from them and copy them and write them down, or you can give keywords or vocabulary that will help them to write it down, or they can just orally say it. So you can have different differentiated techniques in order to best serve students to produce the same final product, but in a way that targets their abilities and needs. In scaffolding, there are three types of scaffolding: either verbal scaffolding, and it doesn't mean only like an oral scaffolding, but actually any kind of written or read or said instructions for assessment. So if you're writing the headings of the questions and some choices and some explanation of the task that the students are doing, you need to make sure that these words, these sentences, these directions are explained in a scaffolded way for students. And in a scaffolded way, I mean more simplified language, the choice of vocabulary, less complex sentences, shorter sentences, to the point, using visual aids to help the students, assist them to understand what's asked from them in this task. This will ensure reliability and validity of the assessment result. You'll reassure uh, or you're assuring that these scores are well counted for, not because of any other hindering obstacles throughout the process. Procedural scaffolding, as we've discussed before, is that when you give assistance and support for ESOL students throughout the task. This could be as simple as providing dictionary, or providing keywords and vocabulary, or have them work with a bilingual partner, or even sitting with you in a pair kind of assistance where you're giving this needed support. In the scaffolding for instructional purposes, this is the part where you actually prep. Here you're prepping for these two. So the more you scaffold instruction and make it simple, direct, useful, contextualized, the more when you come here you'll be providing less support because the students understood the content, and also more of guidance that is a consequence of what happened to in the instructional phase. So for formative assessment, when you are using formative assessment with ESOL students, the top of your pyramid is differentiating and scaffolding this assessment. So if we think about it, the formative assessment cycle, it starts with building your objectives, finding your objectives, clear, writing it down for each of the unit that you're assessing. Then the teacher thinks of what kind of instruction do I need to choose, what are the methods that I need to choose in order to best deliver these objectives. The teacher is the mediator of this instruction to best approach the students, and then chooses the assessment, or responsible to choose the assessment that connects it to the instruction. So objectives is connected to the instruction, is connected to the assessment via the teacher, who is always in the process of choosing what best matches the other. Then the assessment evaluates the teaching and the learning process, and then if needed or when needed, teacher can reteach in order to reach back or to achieve the well-designed or needed objectives. Okay, now I posted under Blackboard, you'll find formative assessment resource document with today's date, June 8th. You will find these videos. You'll find several resources. The first group of resources titled under formative assessment. These are 3 videos that will take you from the explanation of the core features of formative assessment. Then the next 2 videos are examples, classroom practical examples of implementing formative assessments and project-based assessment inside the classroom. So please, at this phase here, you can stop, go to the document, open the videos under formative assessment to watch these videos, and then maybe you can come back here to this document. Actually, after you finish watching the videos here, and these are the features that you're going to find under the video: designing the learning criteria, designing the success criteria, designing the learning environment and providing resources, and then developing the learning through feedback. Giving continuous feedback is something very important and essential for formative assessment. This part is in that first section in the document that says formative assessment videos. After you do that and watching the last 2 videos under the formative assessment videos, after you watch that, you'll be prepped with some ideas and strategies, formative assessment strategies, examples that you can use in your classroom. After you finish these videos, please go to the document that gives you different examples of strategies of formative assessments. You'll find this document called Formative Assessment Strategies and Techniques. Please open that and you'll find around 60 something strategies that you can use in your classroom as formative assessment tools. So continue with the formative assessment strategies after the videos by reading these 60 strategies that you can take notes of, write comments for yourself, add them to your resources, and maybe use them and try them out in your classroom. After you finish that, come back to give you an explanation on another strategy, formative assessment strategy called portfolios. So when you come back, you'll listen to this. Portfolios are divided into 3 types. It is best that teachers understand the distinction between the 3 kinds of portfolios. If you start implementing portfolios in your classroom haphazardly, then the consequence result is going to be a haphazard score or kind of assessment. So it is important and essential that you understand the distinction between the 3 kinds of assessments. Now, we'll divide the discussion based on the purpose of this kind of assessment, what's included inside this kind of assessment inside this kind of portfolio, when is it usually submitted, and how it's evaluated, and at the end, to whom you present it to. So the first one is showcase portfolio. From the word showcase, the reason or the purpose of this portfolio is to show off students' learning, show off their best work, show off how good they're doing. Hence, what you're going to include in this kind of portfolio is the best material that show areas of strength of the student. No weaknesses, no errors, no problems. You're always showing off the best work that these students can provide. When it's usually submitted, it is usually submitted quarterly with report cards to show how great and how well the whole class did during that quarter. To show off the amount of learning that happened, and show off how much the students worked hard and how much they achieved. It's usually evaluated by first students fill out a checklist of things that they had to cover and whether it's covered or not. Then students reflect on their work, and then they conference with the teacher to give them a constructive feedback on how well they did. There's no talk about errors as much in the showcase, but more of the things that the teachers liked the most about the process and how well they did, and what were the areas they shined the most. It's usually presented to parents, and teachers invite parents to the classroom to show them the students' portfolios and show them how well the classroom was going and how or what they were doing throughout this quarter. Some teachers prefer to not be involved in this presentation process, so usually students take ownership and sit with their parents to show them their portfolios and tell them about it and narrate what happened throughout the process of filling in this portfolio. So it's all about showing off learning and showing off how great and how well they did throughout this semester or this quarter. Under the growth portfolio, you find the purpose. From the word growth, the purpose is to show progress and how much students grow. Hence, you're not only going to put strengths, you need to put strengths and weaknesses in order to show this kind of development of the student from weak to strong or from strong to going down. So it's either or, but it shows some sort of development in the student's work, and hopefully from weaknesses to strengths, definitely. So when is it submitted? It really depends on the objectives and criterion the teacher had put in mind when they were designing the growth portfolio. Do they want to show it on a monthly basis so that they can monitor progress in a monthly basis and address difficulties or weaknesses on early on in the year? Or do they want to do it per semester to just show the progress throughout a one semester cluster or period of time? So it really depends on the teacher's objectives and the criterion that teacher had put in mind before designing or deciding which portfolio she or he is going to use. How it's evaluated, it's usually the same. The only difference is after students do the checklists and reflections and a teacher's conference with them, the teacher needs to put their own reflection of where do they think the student is at, the areas of strengths and weaknesses. Because it's a growth portfolio, it is not targeting only the shining parts or the strengths part. The teacher has to put their own reflection on what do they see is going right and what are their evaluation of their students' progress. Who is it presented to? Of course, to parents, but in here it's also a source of information for administration. Administration usually seek this progress and adequate year progress and monthly or semester by semester progress. So instead of only providing scores and grades, you can also provide portfolio to be another alternative data format. Okay, the third kind is evaluative portfolio. And in the evaluative or evaluate portfolio, you are looking to have some sort of a formative but yet summative assessment. It is not only to show growth or show off learning, but it's more to have a substance of grading or measuring students' learning. So the purpose is definitely achievement measurement. What's included is usually everything the students do, from projects, research, essays, major assignments, tests, quizzes, all of the things that are considered major tasks students have to include in this portfolio, because the main purpose for this portfolio is to look at students' achievements, whether they're at their best or less than what is expected from them to achieve. When it's by default happening as an ongoing process, students are always in the process of collecting their material and adding them to their portfolio, but it's usually submitted at the end of the year, because the main purpose of it is to measure this whole year's score or value of achievement. How is it evaluated? It's always evaluated by rubrics. For each unit, students are are reflecting on what they think they did, and the teacher fills out this rubric through a teacher-student conference. So it's not only narrative, it's transferring into rubric grade because you want a measurement, and whenever you hear the word measurement, then it means it's partially a summative measurement, which is a score or a grade. Who cares about this kind of portfolio? The administration or any officials who might need to look at students' work. It is not, this kind of portfolio is not really heavily used in the US, but many Ivy schools or other countries use this as an alternative, or not only an alternative, but an equal resource data for students' achievement and success at the end of the year, rather than just having the standardized test to measure that. They also can have the alternative of a portfolio. So what is the process of the rubric? The process of the rubric is that you basically define the purpose of this rubric, put down the objectives. So once you define your purpose, you really are clear now about which portfolio are you going to use, right? Once you choose the kind of portfolio that you need, you're going to set aside or put down your objectives. And these objectives can be per unit, a unit by unit kind of objectives, because your portfolio should be divided into your curriculum units. Each unit starts, each unit has to have this cover page of the name of the unit, the objectives of the unit, the checklist, and the reflective sheet of your students, which is here explained in the organizing your portfolio. So the objectives is set per unit and per divider. Okay, in order to have the best organized portfolio, you need to make sure that you have this. You have a front cover, a divider per each unit with its objectives, the reflective documents where students are reflecting on that worksheet or in that paragraph format sheet for them, and then a checklist where students look at what they have completed in this unit and check themselves. Then students start to collect their work and add them under each unit to match with the objectives. And then students evaluate themselves and then sit in conferences with the teacher to discuss their progress and their areas of weakness or what areas need more development. Then teacher can reinforce the learning and give a mini lesson right there, right then, if they think that there was a weakness area. And then students, once their work is finished and they understand any kind of problems or mistakes they had, then they are ready to present it, either present it to the parent, to the administration. It really depends on the kind of portfolio that you chose. In that same document that I told you about here, there was that section of formative assessment. Then the next section was portfolio video. You can watch this portfolio video, and then the last piece here is about scoring. how do you score formative and summative assessment? For summative assessment, like we said, if there are two types of summative assessment, given by the government kinds of assessments, and of course these assessments are scored for you, so you're good to go. But if you are designing teacher design summative assessment, if you're designing this, then you want to make sure that your scores are based on, first, the objectives that you had set down or written as your focus. Then from these objectives you create specific criterion, and these criterion, you take these criterion to be your main source of writing a test based on these criterion. So each section in the test should be targeting one of these criterion. After you write your test based on these criterion, you want to look at the content of this test and of this section and the importance of it. From that decision of how important this section or criteria that is, then you get to decide on the weight of or score weight of each section. So you weigh it and decide which part takes more than the other part. After you weigh it, then when students finish the test, you can simply calculate your numbers and you have a score. Now if you decide to give an average view for your students, how they did among their colleagues in the classroom, then you can give a mean average of letter scoring. So for example, if your students scored, the highest scored in a classroom is 50, and the lowest score is 39, then this highest score considered an A for that class. So this way, if you look at an average mean for the student scores, then you are capable of telling them where they are at in comparison to their colleagues in the classroom. Not that 50 is an A score, but it's just an idea, to give an idea of what is the average of this student inside the classroom. Okay, how do I score formative assessment then? In order to score formative assessment, you need to have these tools to understand them and be able to use them as your resources for scoring. These first three, you'll find them under Blackboard, and each one is by its name: observation notes, anecdotal notes, checklists. So please find that and read it to understand more about it. And then the most famous scoring tool is the use of rubrics. Rubrics are two kinds: holistic rubric or a analytical rubric. You'll find the information and documents of rubric under that same document that's called Formative Assessment Resources. You'll find the third and last section called rubrics resources. So after I finish this, you can go back to it and read the resources to understand more. But basically, holistic rubric is different than analytical rubric in the essence of its design. In a holistic rubric, you only have one criteria to measure in a small project, a small assignment, or a classroom discussion that you wanted to measure the students' learning at that phase. So usually in a holistic rubric, you have one criteria or maximum two criterion that actually at the end it essentially they are linked together, um, and can be put under one criteria. So even if you see two criterion that you need to measure, they usually are linked or related somehow. They're not completely distinct from one another. So holistic rubric are, again, for small projects, for one criteria project, and you usually have two columns. One column is for the scoring level, and the other column is for the criteria description. If you look at this example, for example, you'll find that here is that column that gives the scoring level, and it's usually a 3 to 5 maximum scoring level. So it's up to you to do 0, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, but you don't want to exceed the 5 grading levels. In the other column where it is the criteria description, you'll find that the criteria is exactly the same. You're just lowering the expectation of this score for the students. So you can say the students, for example, exceptionally interpret a bar graph and estimates the values from within the bar graph. And then the second one will be the students accurately, not exceptionally, but now accurately. This one should be exceptionally. I apologize for this. The second one should be accurately estimate the value from within the bar graph, but does not interpret the bar graph. And then at the end, which is a 0, they do not have anything. The student does not have, the student did not meet any of the subcategories within this one criteria. Okay, so is that clear? So here are the levels of scores, and here's the one criteria that gradually goes down or goes up to better evaluate students' work. In the analytical rubric, you'll find there are two intersecting definitions. One is the score level, and the other is the criteria title. From that criteria title, you'll see the description of it under each score or grade level. So at the 3, the description of this criteria title, find it detailed with excellent or appropriate or perfect or exceptional kind of verbatim. Under the 2, you'll find the explanation of this one criteria shows that it's not exceptional, but it might be adequate or good enough. Here it's not that great, and here is usually not meeting the criteria. And then you go on to that same criteria, you describe it, and it goes up or down the scoring level, and the last criteria. And again, for the analytical rubric, you can have 3 to up to 10 criterion, but it's really not realistic to measure students for 10 criterion, and it is difficult to evaluate it and grade it, and it's difficult for the students to keep up with all of these criterion. So again, my advice is usually, or it is always advised, to choose 3 to 5 criterion in your holistic or analytical rubric. Usually holistic, you want to stay in the 3 grading scale, but and usually have 1 criteria. But for the analytical rubric, you want to have 3 to 5, and usually it's you'll see the 5 criterion more often. And then for the grading scale, you can go from 0 to 4, 0 to 5, or 1 to 4. It is up to you how you decide to put your grading scale or grading level. Again, please go to the documents under the rubric title of formative assessment resources. So with this video, you'll need to open the document of formative assessment resources. You'll need to open the document of the formative assessment strategies, and you'll need to go to Blackboard to look at the formative assessment scoring tools like observation notes and checklist and anecdotal notes. These are the things that you'll need to use for this lecture and goes well with this video. Hope this was helpful to understand